By the time I reached the end of those 2 years, I believed my life was over. Maybe not physically, but certainly the future I had imagined for myself. I had failed academically. I had been expelled. I had disappointed my father. I had become someone that people pointed to as an example of wasted potential. And now I was living under restrictions that made every day feel the same. Church. Home, church. Home, that was my life. There were no grand opportunities on the horizon. No university acceptance letters, no exciting plans, no vision for the future, nothing. At least, that's what I thought. One thing I've learned about God is that He often sends help from places you would never expect. For me, that help came in the form of a veterinarian. His name was Dr. Njoroge. He would come to tend to the cattle we owned, and over time he became familiar with my family and our situation. What I didn't know at the time was that God was preparing to use him as a door. Looking back now, I can see the fingerprints of God all over that season. At the time, however, all I saw was another day in a life that felt stuck. My father had reached his limit with me. As far as he was concerned, I had squandered every opportunity I had been given. And to be honest, I couldn't entirely blame him. My grades were terrible. My future looked uncertain. And I certainly wasn't giving anyone confidence that I had a plan. Yet somehow, Dr. Njoroge began talking to my father about the possibility of sending me to the United States. To this day, I don't know every detail of those conversations. What I do know is that he appealed to something inside my father. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was hope. Perhaps it was both. The possibility of having a daughter studying in America suddenly became something my father was willing to consider. One day he approached me and told me I needed to apply to schools in the United States. I needed to take the TOEFL exam. I needed to prepare. I remember thinking this was impossible. Nothing about my academic history suggested that I was a strong candidate for anything. But I took the test. And just as I expected, I failed. Badly. There is no point trying to make the story sound prettier than it was. I failed. The scores reflected exactly what years of emotional turmoil and disengagement had produced. My father was furious. Again, another disappointment. Another reason for him to believe I would never amount to anything. At that point, the dream should have ended. That should have been the end of the story. No grades. No TOEFL scores. No academic record worth celebrating. No reason for an American college to accept me. And yet, God had already begun moving behind the scenes. A gentleman associated with Dana College in Nebraska became involved in the admissions process. The school was seeking international diversity. For reasons that still amaze me, my application landed in front of the right people at the right time, and somehow, against every logical expectation, I was accepted. I still remember the shock. Not just mine, everyone's. It didn't make sense. Nothing in my academic record suggested this outcome. Nothing about my situation pointed in this direction. But there it was, an acceptance letter, a door, an opportunity, a way out. For the first time in years, I could see a future. At least I thought I could. I thought America was the answer. I thought America was freedom. I thought America was escape. I thought America was the place where everything that had gone wrong in my life would finally be fixed. I didn't realize that God was doing something much deeper. The day finally came to leave. I remember the airport vividly. My mother was crying. She was devastated. The reality of her daughter leaving the country had finally arrived. She stood there overwhelmed with emotion. I, on the other hand, felt something completely different. Relief, excitement, anticipation. I wasn't crying. I wasn't mourning. I was ready to go. I wore a bright pink suit, a silk scarf around my neck, white pumps. Looking back now, I probably looked like a flight attendant, but I didn't care. I was leaving. That was all that mattered. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful. I felt free. I felt like the prison doors had opened. I felt like I could finally breathe. I remember sitting on that airplane and making a vow, a dangerous vow, a vow born out of pain. I told myself I would never return. Never. I told myself I would never ask my father for another thing. I would make it on my own. I would prove him wrong. I would show everyone who had written me off that they were mistaken. I was done. Done with the disappointment. Done with the criticism. Done with feeling unwanted. Done with feeling like a failure. I was leaving Kenya behind. Or at least, that's what I believed. What I didn't understand was that you can leave a country and still carry the wilderness with you. You can board an airplane and still carry your wounds. You can cross an ocean and still carry your pain. You can change continents and still bring your unresolved battles with you. America wasn't the end of my wilderness. It was the next chapter of it. But God knew something I didn't know. The same God who had opened a door through a veterinarian, the same God who had made a way when my grades said otherwise, the same God who had orchestrated an acceptance letter that made no sense. That same God was not simply moving me to another country, He was moving me toward Himself. I couldn't see it yet. I thought the miracle was America. Years later, I would discover that America wasn't the miracle. The miracle was that God refused to abandon me, even when I had given up on myself. Even when others had given up on me, even when every natural indicator suggested that my future was finished, God had one more move to make, and He wasn't finished writing my story.